Welcome on the Gospel Spice podcast, where you are invited to taste and see that the Lord is good. Gospel Spice is your Christ-centered podcast infused with in-depth biblical flavors and sprinkled with a dash of French culture, guaranteed to spice up your relationship with God. I'm your host, Stephanie Roussel, and here is today's episode.
Yeah.
Swanson, welcome on the Gospel Spice podcast.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, my friend.
Oh, I love you so much. You and I have met several years ago. Like 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. I forget. And I just love you so much. I'm not old enough to be your mom, but I really feel like I just absolutely love you with a deep, a bit of a motherly love somehow. So you're very, very special girl to me. I love you so much. I'm so proud of you, of your heart for God, and how you're extremely brave. You are so courageous, Kara. And I want my people to get to know you, to hear how you are shining the kingdom of God in the very, very unique way that God has wired you to do that. So with this being said, I'd like you to tell us a little bit of your story, who you are, what makes you sing, how you are experiencing the Lord these days. So tell us about you, precious, precious girl.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. I'm honored to be here. I'm honored to be able to chat with you and Gospel Spice. I met Stephanie before I knew about her podcast. I'll just be honest about that. And then when I started listening to Gospel Spice, it became just this beautiful treasure trove and just like this space for me to come and hear about the Lord and feel like I was enveloped in his arms in a new way. And that was really, really important to me. So I just want to say thank you to you for that. And thank you for having me here. And thank you guys for listening to me. I know I'm not necessarily the norm for what you hear in terms of guests.
Yes, you're right.
Podcast.
So you write young adult fiction, which I don't think I've ever had anyone yet on the show doing young adult fiction, but I could not think of anyone I would rather have than you in this category. So that's what we're talking about. And if you're listening, watching this, you're not a young adult, that's okay. I've read Kara's books and they're super cool. So you don't actually have to be young, I guess somewhat adult to read that. But I know a lot of young adults in my life that I want to get your books too. So even if it's not specifically for me personally, even though again, it is too, I think there's a lot of parents, aunts and uncles and friends and grandparents listening to us who could totally benefit from having trustworthy, thought through fiction for the young adults in their lives. So that's where we're going. But before we go there, again, it's your story I'm interested in right now.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why I write young adult fiction is because I grew up as a missionary kid. My family were missionaries overseas for 16 years. So from the time that I was 2 till I was about 18. And the environment that I grew up in and the place that I grew up in was deep interior in the jungle. My family lived with a village that was deep interior, and we learned the language. We were able to bring things like healthcare and just provided opportunities and access for them to just facilities that they didn't normally have access to. And in learning the language, we also brought hope. We were able to learn their language and help teach literacy, these kinds of things. And then also we were able to translate the Bible for them so that they could have that in their own language and be able to discover God and even discover just the hope of a Savior who cares for them and who loves them. So that was a huge part of my childhood. But in that, I was also the only girl my age who spoke English within that entire environment. We had my family, I had 2 brothers, and then eventually a little sister, and then our coworkers had 4 boys. And I loved hanging out with all of the guys. I was very much a tomboy. I was very much that girl where if we were playing games, or like climbing trees, I was like, I don't need to be the damsel in distress, like I'll save myself. Very much that kind of personality. And in a lot of ways, my childhood kind of felt like being a Wendy on a Neverland with like a bunch of lost boys. And so with that, though, I found very quickly that as much fun as gallivanting around with a bunch of guys was, and as much as I was trying to learn culture and language and understand this, this environment that I was in, and I got to become really good friends with so many of the other girls around there, our life experiences and some of our perspectives were just different. And I felt like I missed having somebody who understood what it was like to stand in the middle, to live and grow up between vastly different cultures and perspectives, and to be able to find the beauty and the value in the culture that I had the honor of being raised in, while also understanding that there was value to the culture that I brought with me as well. and not meshing those, but understanding that they meshed within me specifically. So I started reading a lot. I read so much. I remember specifically like just falling in love with things like Anne of Green Gables as an example. I loved Anne. I loved her fieriness. I loved her desire to read and write. I loved all of this. And reading books like Anne of Green Gables, Chronicles of Narnia, so many of these classics made me realize, okay, when I'm reading these books, even if I feel fairly isolated myself, and there were points where I was very isolated as we moved around in different areas, I realized that with reading these books, I felt seen, I felt valued, and I saw these parts of myself that were not reflected in other people around me, reflected in those books. And it made them feel more valuable. And it even made them feel more valid in a way. You know, my dreams of writing and, you know, my dreams of being able to someday get published, some of these things that even Anne, right, Anne Shirley could relate with. And so I started writing really young as a way to pour out all of the feelings, all of the thoughts, and really just to be able to process through the fact that I had seen so many cultures. I had experienced a lot of different things, and I had grown up in an environment that was especially very unsafe toward women. And so I had seen a lot of my friends being mistreated, and I was in a position where there was very, very little I could do about it. And while I was generally not in that same kind of physical danger, I certainly experienced the fear of it. And I was very, very empathetic. And these were my friends, right? And so I was internalizing, I think, and just feeling so much compassion for so many different life experiences, and felt very, very much like I had no control over how to fix some of these things. And so I did the best that I could. I was a child, right? I did the best that I could. And we did see even just a sense of kindness that came into a lot of these, just a lot of these places as they began to understand the idea of sacrifice and the idea of caring and loving and valuing each of us, even if we're unique and even if we're different. But when you grow up in an environment where, you know, a lot of the language is not just verbal, but even, you know, violence or gaining something, you know, or a sense of unsafety, you internalize that, like you carry it with you. And so as I grew older, writing became a way for me to those that maybe didn't have one, to be able to allow myself to feel like I had some place to go, to be able to process a lot of the pain that I had both experienced but also seen around me, and to be able to bring a sense of awareness to a lot of these kinds of topics. And as I grew older, and as you know, as I ended up coming back to the US and kind of starting my own life and some of these things, I started to see a lot of the same fears and uncertainties and even senses of not knowing how to feel fully comfortable and safe in your own skin, not knowing how to feel comfortable and safe within your own thoughts, not knowing how to trust your gut, you know, not knowing how to understand like who are we created to be? You know, what is the beauty that God has actually instilled in us? And I saw a lot of those same fears that I had had as a child and that I had seen reflected in my friends, you know, when I lived out of the country. I saw a lot of those same things reflected when I moved back to the US. And so as I continued writing, the first series that ended up getting published was a Peter Pan retelling, which at the time I was like, this feels so random. Then as soon as it came out, I was like, Kara, you wrote your like it's a fantasy autobiography. No, just kidding. It's not. But there are so many similarities because of the way that I grew up that as soon as it actually started moving, I was like, duh, I am the perfect person to write this. I am Claire. And so I wrote a Peter Pan retelling slash sequel. It's a 2-book series. The first book is called Dust. The sequel is called Shadow. They're available pretty much everywhere. And they're really fun, and they're also you know, they're fast paced. They have really engaging characters. The main character, Claire, is this foster kid from California whose brother goes missing, and she has to try to find him. And she goes to London, and they have all these adventures in London. But at the core of these books, of this two book series, really what I want to do is I want to approach the idea of how our feelings are real, but they're not always true. And how we feel about ourselves does not actually define our value and our worth. And I was able to use the magic system, you know, fairy dust, that kind of thing, to tie into this idea of even when I feel like I am not valuable anymore, even when I've made a mistake, even when I am feeling anxious, even if I'm feeling depressed, whatever those emotions are, those both do not define me, but they also don't have to push other people away from me. And so as the main character learns how to see even her fears and her insecurities and her anxieties as valuable, and being able to actually have a healthy relationship with them, it's part of what allows her to even learn eventually how to fly. So it ties very deeply into like just the metrics of how the story works, but also was a really important mental health element that was both personal to me, but also I had seen, and by this point, by the time that my books came out, I was early 20s and had been working with youth kids and working with foster kids and, having traveled all over the world and all of this for years and years by that point. And so these were topics that I wish somebody had spoken to me about more when I was a teenager, but also were things that I had spoken to teens about a lot as a teenager, working with teens as well.
I'm curious, since you're talking about Dust and Shadow and Claire, who's the main character, like you said, and who's in some ways very much like you, how have you grown? And, a few years later, what would you tell Claire? Or
Oh man, that's a good
would
question.
you write things, would you do things differently? What would you tell her today? And remember that the people with us listening, watching, they probably don't know Claire. So keep in mind, maybe explaining to us her, and you have her progression. And what would you tell her today? What would you tell yourself really as you were writing Claire into being all those years ago?
Yeah. Well, Claire, like I said, is a foster kid growing up in California. She's very much one of those like big sister, protective, her brother matters so much to her. She's deeply empathetic and she very much cares about everyone, but she's also very introverted. And so she's constantly paying attention to everything and yet very nervous about actually stepping out on her own in some of these ways. And so her journey to find her brother, to go to London, to eventually run into Peter Pan, all of these things ends up being really important for her to be able to use her voice. She has one, she's afraid to use it in a lot of ways. I think that if I were to speak to Claire now, me looking back, or even to a younger version of myself, I think just what I would encourage both of us is that if the thing that you value is to interact with anyone with kindness and care and to genuinely care more selflessly about what they need than what you need, then how you feel about yourself actually doesn't matter, because your focus is no longer on, am I saying the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? The focus is less on what's right, and the focus is more on what do they need. Because it's very easy when you're constantly kind of second guessing yourself or trying to fit some kind of a role, to completely miss out on the purpose of why you're even there. And so I think what I would encourage my younger self with, as she was navigating all these changes and trying to understand, like, how do I bring light and how do I be present in these spaces when I'm moving and all these things so often, and when I don't feel like I have as much control over certain situations. What I would encourage myself with is, don't ask what you should be doing, instead ask what they need. And ask what they need by asking them. Like, you can go up and ask someone, what do they need? You don't have to magically figure it out yourself. Like, people want to be asked, people want to be cared for. And so the more that you find ways to care for someone else, the more you find ways to see their loneliness and to see their brokenness and to value that above maybe your own loneliness and your own brokenness. It will allow you to start to understand, I think, what selflessness can be, and how to let that selflessness be what defines you instead of your own fears. I would also tell both of them, Claire and younger Kara, please go get therapy as soon as it's humanly possible, because it is tremendously valuable. So therapy and looking for ways that you can love on others. And when you are just being selfless and kind to other people, then you don't have to second guess it. Like, you don't have to do it perfectly. You just have to do it. And if you're doing it, then you're doing the right thing, and it's okay. And you can take a deep breath to give yourself grace and just move forward, knowing that you did the best you could, and that what mattered was that you did actually genuinely care, and that it really wasn't about you.
And I don't know if you realize that what you just said was deeply biblical, but obviously your worldview being deeply biblical, it obviously seeps out of you even when you don't realize it, because Paul himself says, I do not evaluate myself. He says it in the context of his serving others. And so it's like, I don't need to have my eyes on me, because when I grow in self-awareness, it's going to take me away from myself and onto others, and it leads to a deeper awareness of God at work through others, and how can you join him in what he's doing. And so I'm hearing this from you. That's one of the things I find most endearing about you. One of the many things I love about you is how you are intentional about growing your self-awareness, but not for the sake of your own self-awareness, but for the sake of how it can come along, you can come alongside others, and specifically what this tells you about God, because you're really pursuing him. And I see that in the way Claire behaves through the books, and I see this in you. And it's interesting because you have grown so much in your own understanding of who you are. You said through therapy, through a deep relationship with God, through writing, how it forces you to put yourself out there on the page and serve others. And now you're continuing with a new book series. And I'd be curious. So as you tell us about the book that's going to come out very soon, Ignite, it comes out in August. Tell us about a little bit of the story. We want to hear about the main character. I think we're going to pick up on how she is maybe you today, or in some ways. And then I want to hear, where I want to go is I want to imagine a conversation between her and Claire. Okay, so that's where we're going to go with that. So first, tell us about Ignite. It's gorgeous. The cover is absolutely stunning, extremely mysterious. I have not read it, but I can't wait to. So tell us about it, and tell us about you through it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Ignite Ignite is a story that I've been trying to write for probably 8 years. And I don't even know if you know this, Stephanie, but I've rewritten versions of this book probably 7 or 8 times. Like, it has changed. It's funny that it's about phoenixes, because I like to say that it seems fitting because this book itself has lived so many different lives. And I think that there were several very specific threads that I kept trying to figure out how to explore, and I couldn't figure out the right way to, until the past, I would say, 2 years, where it felt like things suddenly kind of fit. And I do think a lot of that corresponded with my own healing. And as I began to understand, like, okay, this is how I approach my own sense of identity and my own sense of value and all of these kinds of things, suddenly it was like, oh, this is how the Phoenix world works. Oh, this is how all these pieces tie in. Because one thing you'll find out about me is that I write because I care deeply about theme. And I find that writing, especially young adult fantasy, and hang on with me for a second here, but young adult fantasy is one of those unique genres where young adult is generally defined by having a character who's working through a coming of age story. We come of age all the time. Like, we go through these big transitional seasons of learning who we are and relearning who we are. But I find that doing so in a young adult project allows me to be able to reach the hearts of anyone, but especially, those young people that I'm ministering to and working with, and being able to say, hey, I understand that right now you're trying to figure out who are you, separate of who your family has told you that you are, separate of even like your perception of what the church has told you. Who are you when you actually own your faith, own your reality, own who you are for yourself? Who are you when it's not something that somebody else has given you, but that you actually have to take personal responsibility for? And being able to dive into that kind of a transition period, which is so immensely important in anybody's life, but especially for young people. And then being able to say, okay, let's walk through this coming of age story. Let's do it in a way that feels really grounded and subtle. But then let's utilize fun fantasy elements to actually undergird a theme that has so much richness and depth that I would not have been able to have this conversation directly with a teen unless I'd had a relationship with them for years. But through this book, we can talk about it. And that's one of the things that's so valuable, I think, about fiction, is that it allows you to actually, like, people feel safe enough to let their guard down. You can come in and be like, whoa, I actually feel like I relate with this character, or I understand what's going on, or I'm fascinated by whatever's happening here. And it allows you to take that journey with them. And as that character grows and is able to wrestle with the hard things, then the reader is able to do the same. And so my books are aimed at, a slightly younger audience. I would say they tend to be on the older end of the YA anyway. Claire is 19, so technically she's not even a young adult in the same way. And then Mara is a phoenix, so she is technically 200 years old, but she looks 18. So I tend to have characters that are very old souls, I suppose, because I think that I am one as well. And so it's a genre, but I do think it's a genre that most anyone can appreciate.
And now, a brief message from Gospel Spice.
Has Gospel Spice been a blessing to you? If so, would you partner with us to help inspire our generation to delight in God by paying Gospel Spice forward? Our goal is to continue providing in-depth, high-quality, free Bible resources for all. We need your financial support to keep this going. Please pay it forward today by making a tax-deductible donation at gospelspice.com/ donate.
Now, back to the video.
So, Kara, can you tell us more about the story? Maybe read something for us about it so that we get a feel of
Yes,
what it's all about?
absolutely. I'll go ahead and just read you kind of the back cover blurb because this will be more sufficient in explaining than me trying to ramble and do so. Okay, here is the blurb for the book. Can Mara survive in a world where the fire in her veins is worth killing for? In a frozen wasteland, suffocating beneath a dying sun, Mara is a young phoenix raised by her father to explode at his command. He's the only one who can help her control her fire, and Mara desperately follows his orders to protect their phoenix family from relentless human hunters. Her sheltered existence is shattered when her family mysteriously vanishes, thrusting Mara into a perilous quest to find them. Along the way, she unravels a devastating truth. Her people may not be the innocent victims she's been taught to believe. When she comes face to face with a kind-hearted Eli, she begins to wonder if the humans aren't the monsters she's always feared. What if the greatest danger doesn't lie in the icy world outside, but in the truth of who Mara really is? Fire and ice collide in this explosive tale about a phoenix born with the power of a dying sun. So that's kind of the overall description for Ignite. Yeah, it's fun. It's very got a lot of adventure, but there were kind of, I would say, three specific things that were really important to me about writing this story, and that came out in all of the different iterations and eventually kind of, culminated into this version. And those three things are that I really felt like I wanted to write a story about a character who desperately wanted to be loved and valued and cared for, but the person that had raised her and taught her what value was actually manipulating her. Because I have seen so many of my youth kids and just so many experiences, and I've experienced this not even necessarily with my family, but even with like mentor relationships that I had years ago that were not healthy. And it was a dynamic that I feel like especially empathetic, compassionate young women end up finding themselves in, but is not often talked about. And so I want to tell a story about a character who has been raised believing that she's doing the right thing, and that by doing the right thing is to, be this thing that she's been created to be, and to essentially be believing lies that she's been fed, in the same way that I think we're fed lies in so many different other areas, whether it's even like a parental figure. But I think that this can apply just as much to the lies that we believe about ourselves and the lies we believe about our own sense of value. But I wanted to show a story essentially about a character who has been raised to believe that she is innately dangerous, that her body is dangerous, that her mind is dangerous, that her ideas are dangerous, and that unless there is someone else there sorting through her thoughts, telling her how to think, helping her know what's right and wrong, that then she's okay. But if she's by herself, if it's just left up to her, she is not trustworthy in and of herself. And that's a dynamic that was really close to my heart and something that felt important to be able to delve into, because it is such a nuanced discussion, because we can be very selfish. And so if all we are doing is wanting things for ourselves, we are probably going to end up hurting people. But at the same time, we are given wisdom, we are given insight, we are given value by the Lord. And that is really what defines us, not our fears, not other people's insecurities. And in a lot of ways, this is a story about a girl whose parental figure has tried to force her to inherit his fear of the outside world, his fear of himself, his fear of her, instead of teaching her to inherit hope, to inherit beauty, to see that the things that she has been taught to be afraid of are actually the very thing that the outside world is dying for. And so that's another big catalyst for Ignite, is you have this character who's a phoenix. Her blood is liquid fire, and she's very powerful. And so she's been taught that she has to hold everything inside. She can't feel a lot of these emotions because it might end up causing her to, to have her fire become stronger. She's actually had her wings have been cut off, and she's been taught that they can't grow back. She has to keep them from ever growing back in order to make sure that everybody else feels comfortable and safe around her. And so she's bought into this fully, and she does believe that she is the danger. And then there's also this outside world that she's been taught to be terrified of, and there's these humans that are hunting them, and she's been taught that these humans are just soulless creatures who only want to basically take the life and suck the blood and take the blood, not suck, but like take the blood from these phoenixes. And then what happens is her family disappears. And for the first time, it's just her. And her head is quiet and her thoughts are quiet. And she's trying to decide, who am I now?
And her
I
head is
really
quiet
agreed here.
because she could hear her father's voice telepathically
Yeah.
inside her head. So all of a sudden that's gone. Okay.
Yes,
That's what
yeah.
you're
So the
saying.
phoenixes are telepathic. So her father is like physically in her head, telling her what to think and essentially controlling her and manipulating her. And so when he vanishes, suddenly, yeah, her head is quiet for the first time. And when her head is quiet, that's when she starts to be able to hear the song of the creator and begins to understand, who am I and what was I actually created to be? Not what does he want me to be? Not what am I afraid of, what am I supposed to be, but who was I actually genuinely created to be? And it sets her out on this whole long journey to try and find her family and figure out what happened. And as she ventures out and goes to try and rescue her family, that's when she realizes that the humans are actually not hunting them because they're these, merciless, soulless creatures, but the humans are hunting them because they live in a world where the sun is dying. And so there is no heat source left on the planet. So the phoenixes and their flaming blood is the only cure left to keep these humans alive. And so the very people that she's been taught to fear and hate are actually dying. They're fragile, they're worn, they're exhausted. And the very thing that she's been taught to fear about herself is what they're dying for. And so she begins to realize that the thing that she has essentially had weaponized against her is actually the very thing that will bring salvation and hope to these people. And so really it's a story of identity, and it's a story of sacrifice. Because even just like innately phoenixes, at least especially in my version, like you have a phoenix where they look human, but their blood is fire, and their eyes have a little bit of like a glowing glint to them, and then they're able to basically transform into these like majestic flaming golden phoenix creatures. And then once they transform, then they fall to ash and they have to kind of be reformed. And so it allows them to be able to be both powerful but also human and fragile. And it allows for this sense of rebirth, right? And it's able to tie into so many themes that I think we experience ourselves as people in just how many times we feel like we've had to start over. How many times have we had to let go of what we thought defined us and actually be able to step into a newness? How many times does it feel like we've lost parts of ourselves in order to be able to move forward into healing and into hope and into newness? So yeah, in a lot of ways, it's a phoenix story that's fantasy, but it touches on identity. It touches on the idea of identity, redemption. What is true sacrifice? What does it mean to actually understand? And a lot of really interesting dynamics with parental figures, and how do you navigate that? And what does it mean to have compassion for someone and yet be unwilling to inherit their fear and to live life and to perpetuate the cycle that they have probably been impacted by and are perpetuating on you.
Mm-hmm. Which is truly the perfect coming of age story, because it's learning to function outside of the original influences of life. And like you said, it could also be for someone whose parents have been wonderful parents, but there's still those outside cultural influences or other peer pressure influences that still have to be overcome. And so again, to go back to what we were saying earlier, I love how this is an invitation for the reader to introspect, to go into this quest for deeper self-awareness, not for the sake of it, but as the path towards what Mara is experiencing, this other-centeredness that's going to lead her to help others, because she's beginning to hear, as you said, the song of her creator. So what would you tell, how do you imagine a conversation that you would have with Mara? And I love how, Kara, Mara, I mean, the name is barely veiled. So what's a conversation you're having with her these days?
The funny thing is that wasn't intentional, but I just like the name. And yeah, conversation I'm having with her, man, so many.
What would you tell
I'm
her
working on book
about?
2.
Yeah, what would you tell her about? How would you encourage her to cultivate this quest she's on for her self-awareness, for her identity, and by extension, what are you telling the reader?
Yeah. Yes. I think that what I would tell Mara and what I would tell the reader is that you're safe. I think that a lot of times the gifts that we have and the traumas that we have tend to overlap a little bit. And those can be the things that have the potential to either bring immense value and perspective and allow us to actually be able to see other people in their pain, or they can be the same kinds of things that allow us to perpetuate that pain. And so I know that for me, one of my fears, and this is why part of Mara's story is the way that it is, but like, is the fear of, as I gain more self-awareness, I also gain awareness of like my own potential to be hurtful if I wanted to be, right? Like the power of my words, the power even of just like my influence, and wanting to make sure that I am grounded and able to be working toward healing and surrounding myself with healthy people that will speak into my life and be honest with me if I need to grow in an area, and realizing that I don't need to be afraid of the gifts and the experiences, and that I can instead just focus on utilizing those gifts and utilizing those experiences, even the hard ones, for the beauty of others. And like we talked about, it's the same idea. Mara is able to come full circle and able to use her fire to bring warmth and healing to others when she no longer is afraid of what it's going to do to them or to her, and instead is looking for what they actually need. And when she is not trying to find someone else to tell her how to think, but is actually trying to look for people that she can support and help. When it's not about what she can get from them, when it's not about her feeling more comfortable because she has their adoration or she has, them saying that she's doing the right things, but when instead she's finding her identity in who she is and who she was created to be. And then out of that found identity, being able to turn around and support and pour into and create beauty and actually bring healing from ashes for those around her. Because again, it's not about her, and it's not about her needing somebody to tell her that she's okay. She already knows she's okay. And because she knows that she is who she was created to be, then she's able to actually reach out and genuinely help others, and help lift them from their own ashes and their own pain.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, this is beautiful. I told you I wanted to ask you, if Claire and Mara had a conversation, what would they talk about? How would Claire bring wisdom into Mara's life and vice versa?
There are definitely some similarities in their journeys, and I think that they would have such an interesting conversation. And I think that Mara is a lot more grounded, and she's grown up in an environment that is significantly more dangerous than Claire's experienced in a lot of ways. And so one of the interesting things with writing both of them is that Claire tended to be a lot more aware of other people's kind of micro mannerisms. She was very keyed into other people's feelings, whereas Mara was not used to doing so. She was far more aware of herself internally and like keeping herself in check. And so even writing their voices felt very different, even if there were some similarities in their fears. But I would say that Claire would probably just come to Mara and really encourage her with the idea of like, I don't know, like, you're kind of amazing and you can't see it because you've been taught to fear the very gifts that you have. And there's that similarity and that sort of resonance in Claire's journey of her learning to accept her fairy dust and finding the beauty in it and being able to fly and all these things. And there's similarities in Mara and her learning to accept her own just fieriness and her own ideas and her personality and all these different elements of herself. But I think that Claire would definitely come alongside her, and Claire definitely has like that big sibling vibe. Mara's definitely like the youngest sibling who's just not sure what to do and wants to make everybody happy and all this kind of thing. And so I feel like Claire would just probably give Mara a hug and be like, don't stop trying to hide the fact that you have something immense to offer to make other people comfortable. Like, stop trying to make yourself smaller to make everybody else comfortable, and instead step into the beauty and the explosiveness of what you've been given, trusting that if you've been given this, you'll also be given the tools to be able to use it well. And again, if you're intending to use it in a way to help and serve other people, that's what's going to come out of that, even if you have the potential for it to be something that could be hurtful. That doesn't mean that it will be. It just means that you have a self-awareness to see, how can I use these in a positive, healthy way? And that, I think, truly is what allows us to grow and to heal, is to be able to acknowledge our strengths, but also acknowledge our weaknesses, and really come to them with a heart attitude of compassion and humility, and look more for the good and the growth of others. And in that way, I think we will find that we ourselves feel less nervous and less insecure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, this is really good. I love this. Yes, I love this so much. Kara, how can we find you? So Ignite is not quite on sale yet. It comes out in August.
Pre-order.
Pre-orders. All right.
Though.
So
you should be able to pre-order it.
We should pre-order it. And in the meantime, we can read Dust and Shadow and discover Claire and all of that. How do we connect with you? What do we do between now and August besides reading Dust and Shadow and pre-ordering Ignite?
Yes. Well, if you're on Instagram, come find me on Instagram. I'm at Kara Swanson author. I love being able to just connect with people in that regard. I also will link my email list. I would love to be able to connect with you via email. I love the I don't know, the closeness of email, being able to send out an email and then have somebody reply and actually be able to start a private conversation. And so I love getting to connect via email. I also have done a pre-order campaign, and I'm also planning to do one closer to launch. So make sure you go check out Instagram because I'll have things there as well for you guys. But the other place you can find me, of course, is my website, karaswanson.com. And then the last place is you've heard me talk a lot about working with teens. And one of the reasons I mention that so often is because my day job is I co-founded and I co-own a author conservatory. So I basically have started an online program where we teach both writing and publishing skills as well as entrepreneurship for young writers. So it is a 3-year program. It is college level. It's all online. So we have students from all over the world. And I get to teach them how to be phenomenal, amazing writers, but significantly more, we get to teach a lot about just character as a person. We get to teach them how to navigate the ups and downs of the industry. We get to teach them how to take, feedback and critique well. And we get to watch them just grow as people and pour into each other and just become, yeah, it is the greatest honor of my life. Like being able to watch them shine and be amazing. And so if you have a young person who wants to learn how to write, and who wants to learn how to navigate an industry where there's generally not a lot of built-in support systems for. I created the conservatory to give the same opportunities that I had had by having people like Stephanie mentor me as I was getting started in this industry, and to be able to provide really, really high level training, but also really high level input in coaching and being able to just work really closely with these young people. So we'll have the information for that as well. But yeah, you can find me email, you can find me on Instagram, you can find me at the conservatory, and yeah, probably at a lot of events this year
You're
as well.
pretty easy
So
to
if I
find.
happen to be in your area, please come say hi.
Yes, we'll have all the links. You're pretty easy to find once we know to look for you. Okay, Kara, as we end, it's been interesting to listen to you and see your own journey, through Claire, through Mara. What do you imagine you're going to be writing 5 years down the road? What's a theme that's tickling your curiosity these days that you haven't gotten to yet? And I haven't told you I was going to ask you this, so that's okay. Like, this is totally an unexpected question. If you don't have any answer, that's okay. But I'd be curious.
I have an answer.
Where's your eye going these days?
Yeah, so I have this book coming out in 2024, and then I have a sequel in 2025. I really love writing like very kind of atmospheric stories, and I love writing really interesting environments. And so I'd love to do something that has like a little bit of like a Victorian, slightly eerie vibe. I don't know how to explain it, but there's something about being able to tap into kind of like the quiet stillness, and like the mist blowing over the moors and like that kind of vibe. That would be so much fun. And I feel like you would be able to tap into so many interesting themes and just, I don't know, the quietness of like our thoughts at night when we're lying awake by ourselves, and being able to just touch on like, who are we when it's just us? And I think that that's a theme, obviously, that kind of pours into all of my books. But yeah, I think being able to craft themes of just growth and healing, and all of that, regardless of where we are.
That sounds really good. Well, I'm looking forward to reading those. So you need to keep on writing. Until then, Kara Swanson, thank you so much for being with us today. Truly a joy to have you, sweet girl. Love you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephanie. This has been a joy. And thanks, guys, for letting my little YA fantasy self come in here. I hope this was at least amusing and engaging for you.
Hey, I love it.
And now, a brief message from Gospel Spice.
Do you have an idea for a podcast but don't know where to start? Take our Podcasting 101 course with Stephanie Roussel, who shares with you her knowledge and tips to take your podcast from concept to reality. This 3-hour webinar is extremely practical and hands-on, providing you with the information that you need to start a podcast in just 30 days. Plus, the fee for this course is invested back to Gospel Spice. It's like your money gets multiplied. You get top-notch coaching while helping us spread the gospel. Go to gospelspice.com/podcasting for the details.
Thank you so much for watching today's episode. Merci. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and click that bell icon so you are the first to know when we release a new video or episode. Also, would you please consider helping us reach new people with the good news of the spice of the gospel by leaving a 5-star review for the Gospel Spice podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, iTunes, Google, etc. Finally, share and follow us on social media to spread the word of Gospel Spice. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to tune in our podcast with new episodes every Friday. I'll see you in our next video very soon, right here. Merci.